there she is. Welcome to the podcast, Alexa.
Hi.
So I'm Thilo. I'm the founder and CEO of SPRTER, and we have Alexa Romanella joining us. She's a coxswain at the women's rowing team at St. Joseph University at the Atlantic 10 Conference, and also a pre-med student. And she originally started in playing lacrosse in high school, but then switched to rowing. Welcome to the show, Alexa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also want to make sure that I mention Alexa's experience store on the SPRTER app that's exclusively set up for where you can request experiences with her, such a personal Zoom call, one-on-one training, many more. So go check that out. Now let's get started with the podcast. Walk me back. How did you start? You played lacrosse. How did you switch to rowing? And for anyone who's not familiar with rowing, what's a coxswain?
Yeah, so when I had arrived at St. Joe's my freshman year, we had basically been walking around campus, and it's a very big opportunity for teams that often welcome walk-ons at the Division I level to set up tents and literally just walk around and recruit people. And so one of the girls that would end up becoming one of my best friends on the team had walked up to me and my friends, and she was like, hey, did you guys play any sports in high school? And, I said, of course, I played lacrosse. And she was like, well, we kind of take anyone with athletic experience, like you should look into trying out. So I ended up going to tryouts and went through that period of actually rowing. And then my coaches had approached me and asked me to be a coxswain. So I guess to answer your second question, what a coxswain is, we are basically the motivators on the team. We kind of have something similar to like a coach's role where we are moderating and running practices on and off the water. We like to joke that our entire job is just to yell. So in my recordings, you'll honestly hear me just kind of yelling. But overall, our main job is to steer the boat because that's so integral during races. If you go straight, you get the quickest time. So that is what a coxswain does.
Okay, and that's fantastic. And thanks for correcting my poor pronunciation of it.
Oh, it's okay. I've heard it pronounced both ways, even being in the sport for 4 years. So
fair enough, and I guess that's the European in me. I can't get rid of it. Now, when you say your main job is yelling at people, is that where you were really good at in lacrosse as well? Were you directing the team there, and how did that transfer over?
Yeah, so I was captain in high school of my lacrosse team. I was our starting center. So I did end up having to do a lot of directing on and off the field. But for as much as I was very interested and involved in sports in high school, I was also a theater kid. So I like to think that that is kind of where that ability to yell and kind of really be confident in my voice comes from.
That's really good in terms of that transferable skill set. Now, you said keeping the boat straight obviously gets you the fastest time. What's the most difficult part of doing so?
So I guess we have two different kinds of races in rowing. One of them is called head races, which is typically our fall seasons. Those are they're longer races. They're typically about like 5,000 meters in that area, maybe a little bit under. So that is much longer for the rowers, but that is very integral to the coxswain's job because you're on rivers where there's actually a lot of turns that are required. So I would say the biggest challenge, like as a coxswain, having to steer around those courses is taking into account first of all, like the current and the wind, what are the conditions on that river at the time of the regatta and the race, and also planning out how you're going to be making those moves with other boats around you. We like to say, you always want to take the inside line, which is going to be closest to shore when you're taking that turn so that you are, again, giving yourself the best time. But you could have a boat that's right next to you at the time you want to make that turn. And so that's where that motivation piece comes in of, just telling the girls, we have to make a move now. Like, this is it. This is where you got to pull through. We have to walk through a boat and put ourselves in the best position for that. So definitely we take a lot of time looking at our weather apps when we arrive to a race course and finding out what way the wind is going. Is it a headwind or a tailwind? Because that's all going to end up affecting the calls that we need to make during a race.
And that sounds really interesting. Sounds like a lot of strategy going in, but then also having to have the ability to improvise on the swing. Now, how much
Yes.
research do you do before a race on that? As in, what's the current, what's the unique river situation, any of that?
So I would say our biggest head race is called Head of the Charles. And for that, I think I started studying the race course itself probably 3 weeks beforehand. And that really just incorporated going on YouTube and looking up videos of individuals who had GoPros strapped onto them and have rode around the course and getting myself integrated that way. And I was able to go onto the Charles River a few times as well to row over the summer. So that also ended up helping me out. But I guess with the currents and everything like that, I think about a week ahead, we're looking at, what we could end up with. And the nice thing about, like, I guess being in Philadelphia is we have a pretty windy river. So we were able to kind of put ourselves in positions that we could be in when we would end up going up to Boston and race at the Head of the Charles. So, if it was going to be a tailwind, we'd make sure that on the Schuylkill, we were practicing with the wind at our backs the whole time. So our rowers understood what that was going to end up feeling like.
That's awesome. And the Schuylkill is obviously, it's a massive, not massive, but it's a pretty nice river to row, and there's a lot of local competition there with boat row along the Schuylkill River. So it's a really
Yes.
nice area to practice. Now, transitioning into from that, okay, well, how do you motivate the girls to basically do what you need them to do? And have there ever been situations where they're like, shut up, we're doing the rowing? It's like, it's like, is there some tension on the boat sometimes, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, there doesn't end up, there's not a lot of times that there's like true tension. Like, we very much have mutual respect for each other, where I kind of know, for as important as my job is, I'm not the one sitting there doing grueling workouts, day in and day out. But I guess to answer your question about, how we motivate them, it's very much dependent on the crew that you're working with. And that's something that I've been able to notice through 4 years of rowing and being with a new crew every single year. I've had boats that really like that positive reinforcement, saying like, you guys are doing a great job, like, let's keep going here. I've had crews that are really data oriented. They love to know the speed of the boat. They like to know who's around them. They like to know what place they're in. And so it really comes down to just learning what your boat loves hearing and making sure that you're consistently making those calls. And I think that's a lot of where that respect piece comes in, because your boat's not going to respect you if you're not giving them the calls that they like to hear. And so there's definitely been moments where they've been like, Lexi, please just stop talking. Like, this is too much. And, we'll joke about it, but all in good taste, of course.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you're almost getting a psychology degree on the boat there, as in evaluating how your team is doing. And even though
Yeah.
you're pre-med, what's the goal with pre-med? Are you looking into that psychology area, or what are you looking at?
It's definitely on my mind. I do have a minor in behavioral neuroscience, and neuro has always been like a very big area of interest with me as a whole. But I would really love to work on the lines of cardiology and working with heart patients, because I do have a lot of personal ties to cardiology and all of that. And I think, especially being involved with sports for as long as I have, that's, something that everyone talks about, like heart health, and kind of pushing that urge for everyone to exercise and everything along those lines.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's obviously there's massive benefits from that. Now, do you do the rowing exercise with the rest of the team, or you train your vocal cords in the meantime?
So it's a little bit mixture of both. I think one of the unique portions of being a coxswain, or I guess I should say a unique obstacle that I kind of have to work around, is when I show up to practice in the morning, like I said earlier, a lot of times I am in a coaching perspective. And so I'm, walking around the room while the girls are on the rowing machines, which are called ergs. So, I'm looking at the numbers that they're pulling. I'm, calling what's called power tens, which are just strokes that are, typically you're trying to bring your speed up as much as possible when you're taking those strokes. And so that does leave me working out on my own time.
Oh no.
Yes. So I do often, though, will like reach out to the girls in my boat and say like, hey, is anyone doing like an extra row today? I'd love to come with you. And I'll end up, going to the erg room with them, and I get a workout in that way. But I do attend our team lifts with everyone, which is always a fun time, and it helps me to not have to go home to my apartment and do an extra workout for the day.
Fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. And it's good that you still have that workout routine with the rest of the team. I think that I can see why that is important as well. Now, when you grew up and you've been obviously involved with different sports now, we have a segment that we call Pro Advice. Now at Pro Advice, we ask our readers and our listeners to ask questions that we can now ask you. So our first Pro Advice question reads, I want to try a new sport, but I'm worried that I'll be horrible at it. How do I build the confidence just to try?
So I guess that's something like that would be unique to the situation that I was kind of in. And I think a lot of the confidence that I had going into it was just knowing, even though each sport ends up being different in its own right, whether it's truly an aerobic sport, whether it is a ball sport, whether it's something like rowing that is a water sport, just knowing that at some level you have the physical capacity to do it if you've been, playing any kind of sport. And just kind of being kind to yourself through that process. I remember the first time I was ever put in a boat, I got off the river and I called my dad, and I was like, I had an oar in my hands and I had no idea what was going on. I felt like the most uncoordinated person on the planet. I was like, I literally went from, playing lacrosse and being able to, shoot a shot behind my back to like barely be able to coordinate, my body going up to, the catch when I'm in the boat. And so I think that confidence just ends up coming from knowing that you have to be kind to yourself through that process. You're going to get it eventually. And everyone around you is in the same boat, especially if you're a walk-on in a college sport.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and quite literally in the same boat in your situation.
Yes.
It's funny how you just mentioned your dad, because the second submission of our Pro Advice segment reads, whenever I'm at games or at practice, my dad always tries to coach me, but I don't know how to listen to. Should I listen to him? Should I listen to the coaches? How do I deal with that situation? Now, have you had that, or have you experienced situations of potentially teammates that have been in that situation? How would you deal with that?
Yeah, so I know we've been talking about lacrosse a lot, but I did play AAU basketball for a pretty good time growing up. And so I did go through also like the college recruiting process for basketball, although it wasn't, like mainly what I was doing. But I absolutely love my dad, and he, him and I did have quite the conversations when I'd come home from basketball games. And I guess my advice to that would be like, just take everything with a grain of salt and understand that like the information that either of your parents are coming with are always coming from a place of them wanting to do, or wanting you to do as like best as you can in whatever you're doing. But also kind of like being able to set that boundary and say like, hey, I really appreciate you telling me that. But, I was actually asked to try it this way, and just kind of opening that boundary up. But also turning it into a joke. I would always turn it into a joke with my dad, because he'd be like, you never play defense. Like, what are you doing? You never go like run in for the ball to grab it. I'm like, well, actually, I stand out here so I can get more points and be like get a fast break layup, and just kind of explain to him, that way, and just joke about it. But it definitely took me a long time to kind of get to that point where I was okay taking criticism from my family and knowing that it's just coming from a place of them, wanting to make me a better person.
And oftentimes, I agree, it's oftentimes that they want to help, they want to support, they have their opinion, and sometimes they're experts and sometimes they're not. So I think taking it with that grain of salt, as you mentioned, it is really beneficial. Now let's shift gears here a little bit in terms of when you grew up. When we grow up, we're looking at these sport personalities. We're looking at role models. What were some of the role models for you?
That is definitely a little bit of a harder one. I will admittedly, I have never been super into like watching like sports per se and kind of having like necessarily a role model specifically, but my dad and I used to watch, well, we still do, but we watch a lot of golf growing up. And so that has always been a sport that has interested me, both for like what it meant of my dad and I getting to spend time together, but also just I think it's somewhat of an underrated sport. Like there is so much to learn about, like going to a PGA tour and kind of watching these golfers and getting to talk with them, and it's such a different sport than what I grew up playing. And I think that that's something that I've always looked up to, in their ability to just really be like in the moment and be able to like quiet your mind that much, because it's also another sport that is very contingent on elements like wind and all of that stuff. So if I had to like narrow it down a little bit, definitely like individuals in the golf world are definitely athletes I've always looked up to.
And I mean, that is the type of skill that you're using right now, so that makes a lot of sense from that perspective. So it seems like you're quite analytical in that sense, which is going to go really well when you're a doctor in that area, because that's really what you'll be needing. Now, let me ask you a question in terms of when we think about rowing, and we have a segment what we call Break the Rules. And Break the Rules is we want you to think of a rule that would make rowing better. And better could be anything, could be more entertaining, could be better for the athlete, could be better for the audience, could be better for TV, could be anything that you can think of. I want you to break the rules of rowing.
So I think something that I've always been very interested in as a coxswain and also at a school that has a men's and women's team was to see some events that were like men's and women's like mixed in college. I've always kind of wondered how that would pan out, especially because I know some schools will have like rivalries between their men's and women's team, and just like I think it would be, first of all, like a wonderful bonding opportunity, but also great to see, how other individuals are motivated. And it just kind of makes it like such, for me at least, I know I'm not the one doing the working out, but for me, I'd love to see how those two skills would match up. So I guess that would be my rule I would break, to see some college races with men's and women's together.
I love that. And I could see that there again, that tactical, that analytical, and that strategy would, while you say you're not the one who rows, but you would be the person who's doing the strategy there as well, as in how to place them, how to go about that as well. So that's really cool. I love that. That's a very good rule to be broken. I'd like that. So what would be your biggest rivalry in the Philadelphia area?
I would probably have to say Temple University is, I've got friends that go to Temple, in my house with me. So, there's been a long-standing rivalry between Temple and St. Joe's. So I would say that is definitely a rivalry, but in the same vein, especially after Hurricane Ida had hit, early in the fall, and the Schuylkill was very much devastated by that. A lot of the Philly schools have kind of come together, and like we know that on race day it's time to bring it. But when it comes to off the river, like we're all very much, you know, friends and happy to hang out with each other.
That's awesome, and I mean I can understand that the rivalry around Philadelphia is a real thing. Philadelphia, whether it's fans or sports in general, it's a very serious thing over here. So
Yep.
I understand how that can get heated then on race days, but it's great to hear about how the community came together, and particularly after the hurricane, and the Schuylkill has really devastated the whole area, and so it's really nice to hear that the community came together there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with July 1st, name, image, and likeness coming into play, it's really shaken up the college world a little bit. Cute cat, by the way.
Oh yes, thank you.
I think there's always got to be time to acknowledge some pets. It's very cute.
Absolutely.
Now, with name, image, and likeness coming into play, how has St. Joe's, what's been their strategy? How do you feel? Is there a change? How are things different, and how are you approaching it?
Yeah, I think that honestly, that law passing was one of the best things that could happen to NCAA athletes. I think St. Joe's has handled it wonderfully. As soon as that law was passed, our athletic director was having us get on Zoom meetings to learn, you know, the proper way to go about searching companies out and anything along those lines. They were open for questions. I remember when I had reached out to my athletic director to tell them that I was hopping on board with you guys, she was so happy, you know, to hear that, and so supportive. So I definitely think like each school is handling it in their own way, but I really commend St. Joe's on how they've helped us to do all of that. Personally, I love it. I guess it's something that always made sense to me about becoming a Division I athlete, and I know that like with rowing, it's not always the most popular sport everywhere that we go, but I think there's so much to learn from it, and it's great to see representation of any kind, you know, especially when you're playing a sport. And it's so nice to just like scroll on Instagram of friends from other universities that are getting picked up by, you know, like Lululemon and like all of these different brands. And so I think it's just a wonderful way for all of us to get our stories out there, and also to search out brands that really mean a lot to me, like talking earlier about my ties to the medical community, like searching out brands that are, you know, really reflective of what we feel is important as athletes.
And that's really good that you mentioned that in terms of the medical community and getting involved there. And have you seen that there's some responsiveness of them getting involved? Like, hey, yeah, there are, you know, there's medical students, but there are also athletes, and how can we tell that story?
Yeah, I think like what I have noticed from my application process is medical schools love to hear from student athletes. And I think that at the end of the day, like just speaking in healthcare, it brings something like extremely unique to the table in terms of the way that we communicate, the way that we think about taking care of our bodies. And so I definitely would love to see some more, I guess, collaboration between like hospitals and student athletes. It's definitely something that I've been looking into, but it has been a great talking point with anyone in the medical community that I've spoken to about being a Division I athlete.
That's really cool to hear, and it's good to see that there is really that support there and that openness. And I completely agree. It's the best thing to happen to NCAA athletes, and it was long overdue. So
Absolutely.
it's good that it's happened. We're still in very early stages, so I think brand partnership deals is a great way. I think we have a lot of a lot of opportunity to grow there as well, with connecting with others on campus, connecting with fans and so on. So for any of the followers who are here, if you want to connect more with Alexa, make sure to hop on the SPRTER app and check out her experience store there as well. So that's certainly up in, and those are some great opportunities that came with name, image, and likeness. Now, closing, I want to ask you that right now, I guess season is over, rowing season, right?
Yes, we've officially entered like our winter training.
So I guess that means no cold mornings on the river, which is, I guess, a good thing. Yeah. Now, how's your spring goals looking like, and what's the next steps for you in the career?
Yeah, so we, with winter training, obviously comes obstacles as all of us end up going home to separate states, and, not everyone has access to a rowing machine. So, this year especially, we have talked as a team just about holding each other accountable as we come into winter. The unique thing, obviously, about NCAA is we can't have really contact with our coaches in terms of, going to practice with them. We can't have those organized things. So that is also another, fun role of being a coxswain, is kind of helping the girls get through that winter training. And so we were able to get our hands on a app called Erg Race that allows all of us to race each other online by connecting our rowing machines to everyone. So right now it is looking like that is going to be our mornings as we go through a winter break. The coxswains will set that up, and we'll all be able to hop on our rowing machines and race each other. One thing to look forward to is our training trip in Miami, which is the second week in January. So we're very, very excited for that. So yeah, our spring goals, I think, are absolutely attainable. Obviously, going after A10s and really trying to make a good showing of ourselves, and really just making sure the team is on the same page of this is only going to happen if all of us buy into this process. And I think a lot of us are. So I'm very excited to see what our spring season brings.
That's awesome. Now, I must say, with all of your energy in this podcast, I can totally see you on that boat, and I can absolutely see you in those motivational videos on the app. So I'm excited. So anyone up there, make sure to connect with Alexa on the SPRTER app. Also make sure to follow her on all of the other socials, Insta, TikTok. Are you on Twitter as well?
I do have a Twitter account. It's not active, but I will link it to the app.
Okay, so all of those you can. It's an easy link out from the SPRTER app. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with the goals for next season, and enjoy the Christmas period and the winter time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day. Thanks.